a wealthy princess of a scion of a elite family with a pedigree that, is as purely selective as it could possibly be, falling flat on her face in the biggest academic job in the country.
But remember that we have to talk.
And we're calling it racism. We don't take any responsibility. We don't, and we think people are going to buy it. And all they're going to do is raise their eyebrow. Hello, everybody. You've tuned into The Glenn Show. I'm Glenn Loury, and I'm with John McWhorter. Hey, John, how you doing?
I'm jet lagged, Glenn, but other than that, I'm fine and in fairly coherent spirits.
Let me introduce us, and then we can talk about your fatigue. I teach at Brown University. I'm a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and I'm the host of The Glenn Show. John McWhorter is my conversation partner every other week here at The Glenn Show. He teaches at Columbia. He writes for the New York Times. And what are we talking about today, John, is besides you having jet lag, you going to tell us about what you were doing and why?
No, I was in California.
Okay.
There are all sorts of things we can talk about. What's been in the news that's racial lately? Well, for example, we should edit this part out. What are we going to kick it off with?
We can leave it in and take it out. I mean, I'm for leaving it in, actually. Folks out there, we're just trying to figure out what we're doing here.
And I haven't had sleep, and so my brain isn't popping off, but I'll follow you where you go.
Well, okay. Plagiarism needs at least more than one word. That was a piece that you had in the New York Times last week.
Yeah.
Talking about the Claudine Gay situation and whatnot. And, boilerplate plagiarism where you didn't feel you were lazy and you didn't feel like writing the thing yourself, and you knew that there was somebody who had basically said the same thing. So you kind of, you're introducing something, you're summarizing something, and you just kind of lift it out. You change a word here or there, but, in effect, you're borrowing from somebody else is one thing. And a kid comes in with an idea for a thesis and shares that idea with you. And then you take the proceeds for that and you base a paper on it and you publish it in a journal. That's stealing that kid's idea. That's another kind of plagiarism. And we want to distinguish between those two things because why? Because you're bent on defending Claudine Gay no matter what?
No, it's not that at all. I know it looks like it. It's that I think we all know that those two things are different. I think we all know that those two things are different in terms of their ethical egregiousness. And as far as Claudine Gay goes, I maintain that she needed to resign because of the formality of the issue. You don't resign because you're a horrible person. You resign because things are just a really bad look. And you don't get a pass on it just because you have brown skin. But I'm sure that she will go to her grave saying, all I did was do some quotation of boilerplate. It wasn't really any big deal. I'm sure she's saying that to her husband over dinner. And she's not crazy in that. Now, as you would want to stress more than me, there were other reasons that she shouldn't have been in the position as well. And I agree with you. It's very hard for me to say it too often. But yes, you're right. It's kind of convenient that all that stuff happened because somebody with that thin a publishing record shouldn't have been there anyway. But after all that dust has settled, and it has, I just couldn't help thinking there are two kinds of plagiarism, and we all know it. And as we move forward, I think we need to start distinguishing because the way we talk about this is as if she was putting ideas that weren't hers out there, which I think all of us would find repulsive. And that's not what she did. She just lifted boilerplate without citing it.
I've been using a new service that I want to share with you. Ground News is a website and app that breaks you out of your echo chamber and makes reading the news easier and more enjoyable. Every story comes with a simple visual breakdown showing you the bias, factuality, and ownership behind the news stories that permeate the internet. Let me show you how it works. Take a look at this story. Utah is the latest state to ban DEI efforts on campus and in government. The ground news interface shows me that this story has been covered 22 times and that the coverage is heavily to one side of the political spectrum. 35% of these stories lean left and just 15% lean right. Scroll down and we see who owns these news outlets. 64% are owned by media conglomerates and only 5% are independently owned. Ground news also makes it easy to compare headlines. You can just click on the left, center, or right tab and switch between headlines from different sources. My favorite ground news feature is the blind spot feed, which features stories that are underreported by either the left or the right. Here's an example. Harvard's diversity chief hit with 40 plagiarism accusations in wake of Claudine Gay scandal. 91% of the 24 outlets that reported on this lean right. Only one outlet, NBC, is left-leaning. I find myself using ground news more and more. It keeps me more engaged with the news and introduces me to diverse sources of information spanning the entire political spectrum. It's the kind of tool that we need as a society to become more responsible and enlightened citizens. And if you subscribe right now, you'll get 30% off their Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to all their features. This offer is only available through my link, so go to ground.news/GlennShow or click the link in the video description. Try out Ground News today for $5 a month and help support an independent platform trying to make the news more transparent, a mission I believe in and support. Okay, I won't repeat my position, which is, I'm about to repeat it, that the habit of mind, which her many, many dozens of instances of boilerplate plagiarism reveals, shows a shallow person unfit for leadership of an august institution such as Harvard. And then the question becomes, how did she get there? And that then indicts a whole system, which I've been willing to call corrupt. But let me ask you about that, not about Claudine Gay. Whether the diminution of DEI, the DEI brand has taken a hit. Would you agree with that? I mean, Christopher Rufo, need I say more?
Glenn, I think unfortunately that there is a problem with language here that I'm thinking about writing about, although I feel like I've written about it already with the whole issue of what CRT is. But a lot of people think DEI is just kind of the equivalent of taking race into account as a thumb on the scale in affirmative action. A lot of people think DEI is recruitment efforts, making sure that you recruit enough Black people, making sure that you don't have no Black people on a force or within a student body. They think that it's these goodly things. They don't realize what actually goes on behind the scenes. And so for the quote unquote good people, Rufo is the devil because he doesn't want there to be diversity, equity, or inclusion. When frankly, if you're really looking around, and even if you're not looking around that much, you know that by diversity, what people mean is not multifariousness, but Black. By equity, what people mean is not equality, but quotas. And by inclusion, what they mean is changing what we think of as standards and qualifications in order to include. Now, some people will hear me say that and say that it's just bullshit and I shouldn't be listened to. But frankly, I throw that right back at you. That is exactly what D, E, and I mean today. And you can be a very reasonable person and disagree. But you have to know that, Glenn, to see DEI as having taken a hit. You know?
I really didn't. I didn't understand your conclusion.
My point being, a great many people who look at someone like Claudine Gay in that position and cheer don't understand how DEI actually works behind the scenes. They think that DEI is just making sure that we're keeping up with the goals of affirmative action.
And therefore, they will not be disabused by the Christopher Rufos of the world from supporting DEI.
Exactly.
But what I meant is DEI has taken a hit in the public discourse and the kind of underlying support for the politics of racial equity. In that, I mean, is it Elon Musk who tweeted something recently about airline pilots and a major airline having a diversity program, and it has become, therefore, at the fringe, this is at the fringe of the Overton window of what you can say, possible to say, I don't know about getting on an airplane if a black guy's sitting in the pilot seat.
Yeah, I saw
because, this kind of thing. Or the language that says that the whole diversity mania in academia that led to Claudine Gay exposed as now I almost said academic fraud. That's too strong. That's too strong. But nevertheless, seriously discredited. Okay?
Diminished.
And this is the fruit of a tree that has its roots planted in, not firm ground, in rotten ground, really. I mean, it's anti-meritocratic. It's obsessed about the kind of latter day, as it were, woke interest. I mean, you say diversity. I mean, diversity is not a bad thing in a university. Diversity is a wonderful thing. People with different languages, studying different periods of human history, interested in all kinds of profound questions that have been, the subject of human reflection for millennia. That's diverse. That's very, very diverse. But that's not what they mean, as you pointed out, et cetera. But that all these bureaucrats who are counting the beans and holding the hands, they are measuring the extent to which the university is meant to be representative of some demographic breakdown of the population. There's so many ways you could break the population down, but you do it in the bean counting way of looking at their skin color and deciding what box they belong in. And they are holding the hands of the students. They are cultivating in them a sense of identity that's based on flimsy and insubstantial human differentiation. We were born on different continents. My God, it's a global civilization. This is the 21st century. So that idea, the university has to be the institutional conveyor belt of a certain mentality of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of woke, racial justice, sensibility, and whatnot. That's under attack. The decolonize the curriculum thing is under attack because the war in Gaza and the exposure of people on the left of the campus communities, faculty, and students as anti-colonialists, and the identification of the struggle that Israel has to preserve itself with some kind of colonial imposition, and then the right side of history has you having to be against that. That has taken a tremendous hit. The reason that these presidents of Harvard and Penn are no longer the presidents is because in a congressional committee hearing, they couldn't simply articulate forcefully the spirit of one side of that conflict. They didn't know how to say anti-Semitism is Holocaust against the Jews is an unacceptable idea that I would fall on my sword to prevent from being propagated in my institution. They didn't know how to say that. And they're gone. So a lot has been discredited, I'm arguing. I'm sorry to go on so long, John. But it seems to me this is a watershed moment. And it's not because of Christopher Rufo, although he's riding the wave.
Well, I mean, the issue is among whom is this a big moment? I mean, for people, say, in the center and rightward, it has been a beautiful example of how affirmative action really goes. I'm a little worried that now we're using this elliptical DEI term. It's about racial preferences. And you really do see how it really happens. There's a kind of how the sausage is made, in that it turns out that this dark-skinned person had only written 11 real articles. You don't usually get to see it that clearly. But if we, as people center and left, I'm not sure that any lesson is being conveyed, because what a lot of people are thinking is, well, how many articles was she supposed to have written anyway? And yes, I even contributed to that and trying to illuminate that that's a perspective in this. But Glenn, honestly, I think, in my sense, from taking the temperature of people center and left to the extent that I can, And that's been fitfully, because I don't teach on a faculty per se. I teach on a faculty of 2 people, me and one other linguist. But listening to people on campus, listening to people in various places, Claudine Gay's black face, black smiling face, is the decisive factor. And there is a general sense that what happened to her was a tragedy, colored, so to speak, by the fact that that wasn't supposed to happen to somebody who is Black. And that does not make logical sense, but it's there. I'm going to take up, I've got 60 seconds. I want to tell a quick story, but to illustrate how this sort of thing goes. 30 years ago, I was at a little linguistics conference, and it was a conference about social issues. So it's a kind of a hip conference, not about the pointy-headed stuff. And OJ is recent, and there was one person who was invited, a black woman of a certain age who was invited, not a famous one, to speak about language and the OJ trial. Now, to tell you the truth, there was maybe one thing to say about language in the OJ trial, and that is if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, and why that had on the black jury. And frankly, it's not a difficult point. You know, there were a lot of papers about that because everybody thought that was so wonderful the way Johnny Cochran used language a little bit to do his job. And he did his job very well. So this woman was giving this conference's version of that talk that you heard constantly for about 2 or 3 years at the time. Now, everybody comes and sits in the room. Everybody's waiting. The room is packed to listen to the insights of this person. Like 75 people. People are sitting on the floor. She's late. And you know, no one is late to their conference talk. You're supposed to be there on time. But she was after lunch and she's late. So we're all sitting there for about 7 minutes, and then she comes, running into the room. She's smiling. Everybody's so happy to see her. And remember, she's not a celebrity. Most of the people in the room had probably never even seen or heard of her. But what she's about, she's a black woman. She's going to talk about OJ. Yay, yay, yay. It was so fake. I've never talked about that till now, but it's been so long. And most of these people in the room are white. And they thought it was their job to just be in love with this frankly unknown scholar saying something that everybody's heard before, just celebrating her blackness. That's how those same people today feel about Claudine Gay. She's got the brown skin. She's got the funky glasses. She's got the big smile. She's a woman on top of that. And she can do no wrong. I don't think that anything has changed among people center and leftward, or just people who are in the middle, maybe. People aren't seeing her as human. They see her as a symbol.
Do you know who the first Jewish president of Harvard University was?
Rudenstein or Bach?
I don't think either of them is Jewish. I think it was Lawrence Summers.
You sure?
We could look
Nobody
it up.
talked about that. Okay, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in any case, I'm inviting a contrast. So you just gave a statement about what President Claudine Gay, former president, represented in the minds of many people in virtue of her blackness. And we know how this story has ended. She has stepped down after a very brief period of time amidst reputation destroying criticism of her academic standing. So Lawrence Summers also stepped down after a while. I mean, he certainly lasted more than 6 months, but he didn't run his course there. And why? Well, I'm not sure I know exactly why, and I'm not going to pretend to expertise on the matter, but as I recall, there was votes of no confidence within the faculty that made his situation untenable. And why did the faculty turn on him? I'm imagining it was in part because of the controversy around some remarks that he made at a conference on women's underrepresentation in the STEM disciplines that was controversial. I won't replay that.
Do you not want to?
Well, no, I mean, I don't, we could take time and replay it. If you want to replay it, we can replay it. He made some remarks about
the
distribution of innate abilities.
Yeah.
The distribution of innate abilities having different thickness of the tails. Roughly the same mean, but for men, thicker tails. Which means, as a probabilistic matter, if you're selecting far into the right tail of a distribution on this trait, the trait being the aptitude for doing math and physics and engineering, and you're looking for people who are way, way out in the right tail, there are going to be many relatively more men than women if on the hypothesis that the tails were thicker for men. He said this could be true. He didn't say it was true. He said it was a hypothesis worth entertaining, and that was found to be unacceptable.
That was the spirit of a university, to be able to explore any question. Right. Yeah.
Well, I would say so. I mean, I don't want to get bogged down in talking about the Larry Summers. I was trying to get to a different point. And the point was about the reputational consequences for the group. This is Black people. You just got through characterizing it. Oh, she's Black. She's Black. What is that? Is that standing? Is that honor? Is that achievement? Is that excellence? Is that equality? Is that penetrating the citadel? Or is it being patronized? Is it being made into a client? Is it being treated like a child? And I wanted to contrast that with what I understand to be the first Jewish president of Harvard University, who was unsuccessful in his tenure, in terms of what it was grounded on. Was it grounded on solid ground? It's a university. It's supposed to be about excellence. It's supposed to be an intellectual enterprise in the first instance. And I want to say, Robert Kuttner, the critic, American Prospect, I think that's the name of the journal that he and Robert Reich founded, said Summers was just as unqualified as Claudine Gay because he's a neoliberal in terms of economic policy, because he advised badly during the financial crisis, because he supports the bankers, because he's got a retrograde theory of economics. What would I rather be the case? Somebody questions my disqualification because I'm a major league player articulating at the highest level of human achievement the values and principles of a way of understanding the world. Or that I be called disqualified because my resume is paper thin. You mentioned, I'm going to stop. I know I'm going on, John. In your plagiarism thing, you mentioned Neri Oxman, the wife of Bill Ackman, the financier, a Harvard alum who's been making a big stink about stuff at Harvard, and it was a big critic of President Gay. And she was accused, Neri Oxman, was accused of lifting of boilerplate plagiarism in her thesis. And I said, let's compare these two cases, boilerplate plagiarism and boilerplate plagiarism. But people are going around saying, see there, Ackman's wife is a plagiarist. Let's just compare. So I went and I pulled down her CV. And it is stunningly impressive in terms of the intellectual achievements, patents, scores of articles, awards, research. I mean, she's a major global player in her field.
For real. Yeah.
For real. Now, people unwittingly think that, I got a gotcha. You see there, Ackman's wife is a plagiarist too. And I go and I take a look and I can't help but escape. No. Ackman's wife is actually one of the top dozen people in her field on the planet. And Claudine Gay is a non-entity as far as being a person producing research of consequence for understanding human society and experience. And you think it's a tie? You think it's a trump card? You think it's the same thing?
Well, see, this is why we need to be very explicit about the difference between boilerplate and real plagiarism, so that, frankly, you don't pretend that Oxman's career is invalidated by those minor torts near the beginning. And I would like to interject that the difference in degree and the difference in CV, curriculum vitae, acknowledged, Ackman looks absurd. And I want to make sure that I'm on the record saying this. For him to be jumping all over Claudine Gay about the boilerplate, and then 2 seconds later, when it's discovered about his wife, saying all the sorts of things that I was saying in my piece, before I wrote my piece, but suddenly...
and much more elaborate. Excuse me for interrupting, but he's much more elaborate. He gets down into statistical counts of how many paragraphs and how many sentences, and his minutia of trying to defend, what probably is not defensible, but is also not that big of a deal. But
it
anyway.
isn't. But the principle of the thing, really, Ackman really looks awful. And I hope that he realizes how hopelessly fake and contingent that whole defense looks. I thought he was brilliant. I didn't completely agree with his intentions, but I thought he was brilliant. He's applying his brilliance there to a nonsense, hopeless argument that I really thought someone like him would know better than to try. He, like Claudine Gay, should have fallen on his sword and said, okay, whoops, got me. Sorry. Can he not do that? That makes him a smaller person. Just want to get that in. However, I agree with what you're saying, basically.
Ugh. All right. Enough of that.
Glenn, I think they don't think we're smart, ultimately.
Who are we? Black people or me and you?
Black. But Black people in general. I think part of the reason that they think that Claudine Gay's small resume doesn't matter is because they figure, well, for them, that's pretty damn good. I honestly think that that's what they all think. And I think that unfortunately, a lot of us have taken in the same thing. I think a lot of Black people think, well, for us, that's pretty good. And I think it goes into something like, that isn't what we do. I think most people feel it as a kind of a cultural thing. You write a few papers to show that you can jump through the hoops, but then you become a dean so that you can foster diversity, et cetera. But really, there's a fine line between that. And we just aren't the most able linear thinkers. And I think a lot of good white people have just given up on us in that way. And I think that colors a lot of this too. It's a sad thing. It's the sort of thing that last time we talked, I was saying that sometimes I just want to stay in my house. I think that's part of it. Just saying. Don't you get that feeling?
Yeah, I do. I was going to ask whether you saw in the comments how people responded to your wistful, pursuit of solitude and bliss in your hobbies and in the world that you create for yourself and your music.
What did they say? Huh.
They said, yeah, John, I can identify with that. Or, they liked it. They liked the idea of you. They say, oh, me too. During the pandemic, I was going out less, and I actually don't go out as much anymore at all right now. And I understand when not to have to deal with the bullshit, that, which was kind of, I can't remember the specific trigger, but it was something on a race type question where you would be in the minority of the consensus opinion, and people would expect you to have a certain, I
don't want to live next door to a cop.
Yeah, that one. That was it. That was
it.
And you just said, I'm tired of that. I'm retreating to my dinosaurs and, my piano.
And the sad thing is that I meant it. And there really are a great many dinosaurs. And I like them. So, yeah, it's just...
I think what people like is that you're a full, whole, well-rounded person, and that while you have staked out this ground on the race questions, it doesn't define you.
It doesn't. It really doesn't.
But it kind of defines me. My memoir, which is coming out in May, everybody, you can check it out in the notes on this post, is subtitled Confessions of a Black Conservative. I mean,
It's a page turner, folks.
Thanks, John. But I wanted to ask you.
It really is. So, yeah.
Oh, you say the sweetest things. I want to ask you what you think about that Black conservative part. Do you agree that I'm a Black conservative? We're so closely associated as we are here at the Glenn Show as conversation partners that you might be tainted by your affiliation with, when they mention the list of Black conservatives, sometimes I see your name next to mine, and I wonder how that makes you feel. What's your thinking about that? Sorry.
There's a part of me that when you are explicit about being a conservative, it makes me itch a little bit because I think of you as just you. I think of you as somebody who uses logic. That didn't come out right, but I'm jet lagged. But I think of you as just reasoning, not being part of some group. And you're not part of some group. One of the essence of you is that you don't like being part of a group. But if you call yourself a conservative, then it means that you and Shelby Steele and Tom Sowell and Walter Williams and Armstrong Williams are all hanging out in a room thinking the same things with Clarence Thomas. And I just...
And Larry Elder.
And Larry Elder. He's an interesting trajectory, but that is not the way I think of you. And yet I know I make those lists. But to tell you the truth, back in the day, 20 years ago, I was on the list and everybody seemed to think I was Clarence Thomas's nephew or something like that. Nowadays, there is that list of quote unquote Black conservatives, but it's generally said that it's not really conservatives. It's just people who don't think like Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ibram Kendi, and Nikole Hannah-Jones. I think people are beginning to understand that you can come from many places and that if anything, the views of those three people and what they represent, I don't think those are thought of as default among as many people as of a Black view as they used to be. I think that what's happening to my verbs, it's because I just got off the plane. But it's that. I think that there's a progress being made, partly because of the nature of the internet and maybe iPhones and our show and how easy it is for things to get around. So I don't mind being on that list because I don't think people mean by it what they used to. Everybody knows I vote Democratic, or if they don't, they're not paying attention. Everybody knows I have all sorts of views. I'm just heterodox. There's a heterodox list. I don't mind that.
Okay, I have an analysis. I see three dimensions of quote unquote Black conservatism. One of them is political economy. So you're for free markets and small government, and you're distrustful of welfare. Another is cultural. So you're religious, your traditional values, you're, not with the ultra postmodern new age sensibilities around basic issues. And then the third is just heterodoxy from the consensus opinion about whatever. So, you don't like affirmative action, or you think reparations is a bad move, or you're tired of all the belly aching and, kind of victim mongering and stuff like that as a Black person, and you speak out against that. Which is, I think you are not a political economic conservative. You are not a cultural conservative.
No,
you're much more of a kind of centrist Democrat on the cultural issues, and you're much more of a kind of maybe moderately right of center Democrat on the political economy issues. But on the on the Ta-Nehisi Coates' or Ibram X. Kendi's dreadlocks, or the Nikole Hannah-Jones persona, Ida Bay Wells, kind of a persona, what she embodies and what she represents on behalf of articulating African Americans. On Ta-Nehisi Coates, back in the day when he was ascendant, a lot of it was stylistic. A lot of it was, arrogating to himself something about speaking for Black people that you took exception to. But I don't know how much you guys differ on social policy questions and whatnot. I don't know. I'm characterizing you. You might think I'm not doing it accurately.
No, you are. I am in that third category, and therefore think that the role and significance of racism is vastly exaggerated. Many people think of that as a conservative position, but it has nothing to do with wanting to conserve anything, racism in the past, if we're going to think about it that way. It's just that, and not to drag these people's name through the mud, but it's illustrative because they're very active on Twitter. Nikole Hannah-Jones and Ibram X. Kendi, their lesson from Claudine Gay is it was racism, which I think is extremely oversimplifying it. And I think many people left of center would say that too, but both of them firmly believe that and continue to tweet about it. And I don't think we need to have any doubt that Ta-Nehisi Coates' view would be the same if he were still on that platform. If somebody like me says no, and that's considered a radical statement to say that no, racism was not the reason that she got knocked down, and racism is vastly exaggerated as a reason why there are disparities between white and Black people today. That's considered a radical thing, and there's a shorthand of calling that conservative. But I think that the language and the reality have a very approximate fit at this point.
So I'm moved to invoke my Larry Summers analogy again and wonder about calling that anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
And how absurd that'll sound, and how inept it would be for an advocate of Jewish interests to make an argument in those terms.
That it was because
it would just be ridiculous. It would be laughed out of court in a minute, and it would be shown to be a certain kind of identity mongering. Oh, everything's anti-Semitism now, kind of thing like that. But this is that. Oh, everything is racism now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's rather than, and of course, for these people, blackness is different. Everybody's.
But we don't have the wisdom to forbear. We don't have the sense of self to say, no, I won't present myself prostrate to the nation as a monger of my own victimization. Everything's racism, including a wealthy princess of a scion of a elite family with a pedigree that, is as purely selective as it could possibly be, falling flat on her face in the biggest academic job in the country.
But remember that we have to talk.
And we're calling it racism. We don't take any responsibility. We don't, and we think people are going to buy it. And all they're going to do is raise their eyebrow.
Glenn,
and
you and I have been in certain settings. Remember that time we were at Skip Gates's house having dinner, and it was you, me, Larry Summers, Skip, Orlando Patterson, Marcelliana Morgan, and some other people, and we were all having dinner. Remember that? This is like in 1952. Well, at that,
no, you were out there giving some lecture, weren't you?
Was that what that was? It was when I gave the whatchamacallits.
The boys.
That's right. Yeah, this is so.
I just remember you playing the piano and whatnot.
I did do that. I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was nice.
02. That's right. And in that same setting, I'm sure Claudine Gay has been in that same setting. You're sitting there, you're drinking the wine, and the hired caterers who bring out the appetizers and stuff. I'm quite sure that she has various stories she tells of the racism that she's undergone, even as the scion of wealthy Haitian immigrants because of her dark skin. And so she has stories about being discriminated against at Stanford, I'm sure, because it was very fashionable among Black undergraduates at exactly the time she was there to talk about that sort of thing. And I'm sure she talks about how her dark skin has gotten her discriminated against even by some Black people. I'm guessing, but you've been around after a while, you get to know types. Somebody could type me too. But remember, she thinks of herself as a victim of racism. She's got all sorts of anecdotes. And so the fact that she comes from rich Haitians doesn't matter. It's all about our skin color and all of that bigotry that we all suffer as the result of it. And white people buy completely into that exaggerated mythology, which Tyler Austin Harper has so perfectly skewered in a couple of his pieces. And not to say that he doesn't understand his racism, but people have taken it too far. So yeah, frankly, remember that she thinks of herself as a victim of racism. And that this would be just one more example. She's a late 20th century educated Black person. That's what one thinks. So here we are.
I'm remembering this piece by Adolph Reed from, I don't know, The Nation
Your
or
friend Adolph.
The Village Voice. He's not my friend. He's a political scientist and a Marxist and emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania and a thoughtful guy. Anyway, he has, what are the drums saying? What are the drums saying? That's in the title of the piece. And it's a critique of Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Cornel West.
What did they do?
Well, they were in, so the title is meant to be ironic. It's meant to be the Black native who is being asked by the white safari captain when he hears the drums beating off in the bush, what are they saying? What are they saying? Because the drums are beating. That means the natives are communicating with each other. You need an interlocutor. You need a translator. You need somebody who can tell you what the drums are saying, who can tell you, who can put you in touch with the temper of the native. Now, that person is not going to be a representative selection from the native population. That person is going to be an elite, refined, person who has been cultivated to this position. But
they're an interlocutor.
It's a way of doing race in the academy that I think he was trying to satirize. In that doing race for the white establishment to feel that they have an adequate, presentation of the racial sensibility, but it's not really critical. This is me and trying to interpret. They were celebrity Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And that's why we irritate in some quarters, right? Because we're not going to do it.
I don't know if this is characteristic of Professor / former President Claudine Gay at Harvard, though.
I don't either. I really don't. I'm taking a guess about what she would say about her racial experience. But it's why, for example, it can be difficult to get a real discussion going over the difference between Black people with ancestry and slavery, such as you and me, and people like her. One might expect that people like her would have a completely different take on American life than people like you and me. But the immediate smackdown response is all of us suffer racism all the time. And so that unites us all as Black people, whether our parents are from Nigeria, Haiti, or Cleveland.
We know. Yeah.
I'm not sure I really believe that. I really do think that the people from Haiti and Nigeria, or the parents are from Haiti and Nigeria, and how much they excel actually shows that we should be fascinated with why they excel. Actually, Wilfred Riley was another one of these heterodox Black thinkers, and I think he deserves more attention than he gets, and he seems to spend his entire life on Twitter, and he's brilliant at it. Actually showed the other day on Twitter, I'm revealing how much time I spend working on it, but I can't help it. He actually showed a chart. He said that somebody had dared somebody to show a test of IQ where Black people came out ahead. And apparently they do in England. And it's because the Black people there are immigrants, mostly recent immigrants. And that means that the cultural factor that holds back Black Americans on those tests, I've always thought it was cultural, but I don't have the expertise to put my finger on it, doesn't operate on them. They are higher IQ'd than the whites over there.
Yeah, I'd be very careful. Because you've got all kinds of selectivity going on. I mean, these are people who are the descendants of immigrants to the country. They're not a random draw on the population, and they may be different, not just in terms of their culture or their genes, but in terms of what their situation was in the mother country before they elected to migrate in the first place. I just be careful. In one study, you don't come to a conclusion like this based on one study. It's become suggestive and it gets amalgamated into literature. So I do admire Will Riley, though. I know him and admire him. And I think he might even call himself a conservative, for all I know.
I don't know if he does.
But he is thoughtful. I don't follow him as closely on Twitter, although I do follow him. But I don't spend as much time on Twitter as you do.
You have to learn what people think on the other side.
I did notice that Ibram X. Kendi was outspoken on Twitter about the Claudine Gay situation, and I thought he's undeterred. He has a life outside of the mainstream media's kind of characterization of him as a failed academic entrepreneur who was kind of an empty suit, and everybody's agreeing with me and you that Ibram X. Kendi was much to do about nothing. But he's undeterred out there in the Twitter sphere because he has a following and people are giving him affirmation.
Well, it's another sign of the times. It's easy to miss signs of change. Is that, I don't think that he's fallen. I don't think that what happened a few months ago destroyed his reputation completely. I think that he had a stumble. But what's important is that when he goes on those Twitter thread rants, and, think what you will of them, notice that he can't write them anywhere official. So, for example, you don't see that appearing in The Atlantic, where he writes for. You don't see it anywhere else. In other words, the mainstream media is not interested in that kind of rant. He has to put it on Twitter. That's a sign of the times, because 10 years ago, he would have been writing that in The Nation, or he would have been writing that in The Times. Things are shifting. That kind of third-rate African-American studies view that he puts out there, he can put that on his Twitter thread, but it doesn't wind up in cold, hard print. That's significant. The discussion is shifting, I think. Or do you think I'm being a Pollyanna in that?
No, I think maybe it's too early to tell. You say that his reputation hasn't taken that much of a hit, but it has taken a hit.
I think so, yeah.
And I don't know if that influences how editors decide about what they want to print from him or not.
I just noticed that there's a major difference between his Twitter presence and what he's allowed to actually write. a larger gulf than there is in many people. And it says something.
Okay, so here's what I find really ironic. There was a controversy at Harvard about Roland Fryer, and he got suspended under some Title IX judgment over which Claudine Gay presided. He's still there, she's out. As president of the university, she still has her faculty position and her $900,000 a year salary. Roland is back from his suspension and he's flourishing, and is still Roland Fryer, which is one of the leading economists of his generation. He's going to be fine starting companies, doing research, teaching. He'll be fine. That I find to be ironic. At the University of Pennsylvania, Liz McGill and Amy Wax are colleagues in the same faculty at the law school. McGill ascended to presidency of the university, but had to step down amidst dissatisfaction with her handling of her responsibilities. Amy Wax is under indictment, quote unquote, from the faculty senate's disciplinary procedures for comments that she's made in public that people have found to be unacceptable. They found to be racist. They found them to be anti-Asian immigration and things of this kind. And she's said to have conducted herself in a way that makes her fit for disqualification, although she's fighting it. And I don't know what the ultimate, I think it's still yet to be determined exactly whether her behavior is going to be sanctioned by the university in this way. But so as I speak now, she's still standing. Amy Wax is still standing. Liz McGill is gone. Roland Fryer is standing and flourishing. Claudine Gay is gone. What do we make of that?
I think that that is a really neat pattern, but I think that I am going to call it coincidence until we see maybe a third and a fourth. But something about Amy Wax, though, I've made my views about her statements on this show clear. But to be honest with myself, I have to say this. The things that she's on record as saying, there's like a collection of about 23 statements, are so egregious that it almost reminds me of this. There ought to be a name for it, but I'm not good at coming up with names for things. But the fact that whenever you hear about some terrible cop killing of a black man by a white cop, the story is never what we're initially told. Like often it's just almost too good to be true that somebody did X, Y, or Z. Why would anybody be that much of a barbarian? I wonder with the Amy statements, because apparently, from what I've heard, she claims that she didn't say those things or they were taken out of context. Are people by chance, I'm just wondering if this is what it's going to come down to. Have people by chance been making things up or radically taking things out of context in order to take her down because they've decided that she's a bad person? And I genuinely don't know, but those statements that she made, even if she is a rather colorful and take no prisoners kind of person in terms of the things that she'll say out in the open, did she really say those things in front of students, some of those things? And I just wonder, I now am leaving a little bit of sunlight in that maybe this stuff is not what we've initially been told. I'm just wondering.
I don't think Amy's that bad. I don't think she's nearly as bad as she's made out to be. I think it's Heterodox Academy or FAIR. One of them had Fire. It's Fire, Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, had a video kind of conference where Amy presented her defense and people commented and there were questions taken from the audience. And she basically denies, I didn't do it. I mean, they say I said this to a student. I mean, it's taken out of context, or I didn't say it, and I have no recollection of having said it. It was in 2012 or something, or whatever. I mean, she did say that she thought some her classes, she'd very seldom seen a black student in the top part of the class. That was her experience, and that was said to begin. She did say she thought that Asian immigration was not entirely helpful to the country. I took strong issue with her. She said that in context of discussions that we had at the Glenn Show. She is of the belief that traditional values circa the 1950s are a stronger foundation for social flourishing in a society than the latter-day values of the liberated 21st century that we live in. And, she's entitled to her opinion about that. She has her reasons for saying it. You don't have to agree with them, but is a position that could, I suppose, be argued. And she's a conservative in terms of race and law enforcement. She's a conservative in terms of racial preferences. She's against them and against the defunding the police and that kind of stuff. She's a racial realist. I think this is where, it certainly gets your attention. So she criticizes Charles Murray from the right. She and I discussed Charles Murray's book, Human Diversity, with just a comprehensive tome where he surveys the evidence on differences in human populations defined by racial ancestry, by gender.
And by, book. Yeah.
It's a big book. It's what Charles has chosen to spend his time doing, and he does yeoman's effort at.
I'm thinking that I've got the wrong book in mind.
Anyway, I'm just trying to say.
That one, but I read the shorter one. Anyway, go ahead.
Amy is critical of him in part because he doesn't want to acknowledge more forcefully the inherent racial differences in populations and capacities for intellectual work. And Charles says he's resolutely agnostic about the nurture-nature question. He says he doesn't think the evidence is sufficient to have a very strong view, although he certainly thinks both are involved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But Amy is out there kind of saying, if we don't own up to the reality of the fact that the races are different, and we keep thinking we can fix the inequality problem through one or another social scheme, we're going to be chasing our tails forever. I hope I don't do injustice to her. I'm reporting what I understand to be her position. And, that's very controversial. And I almost want to say to Amy or anybody who takes that position, the position being the races are so different in their intrinsic endowments that inequality is inevitable. And what's all this fuss about racial inequality? I want to say to them, I don't think the evidence is anywhere close to supporting that deterministic view. I think the scope for the revision of people's behaviors that would lead to differences in performance. I'm talking about what happens in families. I'm talking about what happens in schools. I'm talking about what happens in the culture is hard to know. I mean, I think it's in some sense unlimited. And I think the political consequences of taking this, the word is escaping me now, but this kind of, I give up on the possibility of change. I said this to Charles when I interviewed Charles Murray. I said, don't try to tell me that Black people are not capable of rising to the challenge of the modern world. Don't tell me that. That's something that I refuse to accept. And moreover, you don't have a scientific grounding for saying it. So, I want to develop the capacities. I say people have the intrinsic endowment. It's a question of developing their capacities. I see no reason not to take that view.
I just want to say that I have been particularly interested in the anecdotal Amy Wax statements. Does she toss off things in front of a class, such as that being, classic American culture is underrated, or making a comment about the nature of Asian names, or saying something to a Black female student that implies that she's one of a very few who are as good as she is among people of her color. Did those things actually happen? Maybe they did, but I wasn't there. And sometimes I start to wonder, given how often the wool is pulled over our eyes. And with Amy, I would have to say this, and I may be coming from a point of naivete because my command of her literature is not comprehensive. But then again, her literature is processable. We're not talking about 30 years of something she's written every month. Amy is somebody who goes for quality over quantity. I am not aware of where she said, if we can't talk about these things, then it means that A, B, and C. What I know of her saying is we've got to be able to acknowledge these clear differences in mental candle power. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and please tell me. Does she say, and therefore we need to get rid of welfare. We need to get rid of these government programs. We need to get rid of racial preferences for good, etc. My sense has always been that she's a little hesitant about that. She basically just says, we must be able to talk about it. And then if you
I don't know about
to what end,
yeah.
and you don't get an answer, which I
No,
find.
I don't know about welfare, although I think she would be suspicious. I mean, she wants a traditional family to come back, and she's. But I'm pretty sure about affirmative action that her opposition is implacable. She thinks and I am inclined largely to agree with her. It's a corruption of the institutions, and she thinks these bureaucrats who administer this DEI mandate, they're full of second-rate people and misguided people who are basically racist and anti-Semites. So what she said to a student about whether or not they got a double IV because they're Black, I don't know. She has an answer to that charge. I can't recite it chapter and verse, but she thinks she's taken out of context or denies having said it. But could she have made a remark casually in a class that some people found offensive? Of course. I mean, in fact, I think it's likely. I can testify from my own. Let me tell you just and I'll finish.
Health-preserving.
I'm at the Penn Law School giving a lecture and against mass incarceration, saying there are too many Blacks in prison. First question I get from the audience is from Professor Amy Wax. I don't know her at this time. This is before I'm doing the Glenn show, and she says, or before I'm doing it with her, and she says, "No, I actually think that there are too few Blacks in prison." Full stop.
What year?
I mean, she throws down the gun. It was like 20. It was the year I visited Columbia, 2010, 2011.
Okay.
So it's probably December 2010.
At a time when she had reason to believe that she was being recorded, she stood up and said that.
It was a room full of people. It was a faculty seminar. And I was on a anti-incarceration shtick. I had me and Bruce Wester, and we had all these studies going at the National Academy of Arts and of Sciences and at the American Academy of Arts and stuff like that. I had given the Tanner lectures at Stanford. I was going around the world talking about the horrors of America's over-incarceration regime, and they invited me in to do that. I'm a Black guy, said there are too many Blacks in prison. She said, no, there are too few. Now, if I'm a kid sitting in a classroom and I raise my hand and I say, I think there are too many Black people, how do you account for that? And she says, actually, there are too few. I would be offended. That would be a racist act to me.
I don't think she'd do that in a classroom full of law students. I think there's a certain self-preservation that's inherent to all human beings. In front of a bunch of grown-ups, okay. But in front of a bunch of 22-year-olds, who would do that? Now, if she has done it, then I maintain that I am really, really dismayed that she would throw fire. What's the expression? Throw gasoline on the fire like that, given that Black students already come into higher learning being taught that if they're feeling a little insecure, they can look to racism as the reason. I'm very disappointed that she would do that. But I have a hard time imagining her as somebody sane and brilliant saying things like, well, too many Wongs in this class. Or something
well, no, I agree with you about that, but I actually want to defend her on the too few Blacks statement in the sense that what was her reasoning? Her reasoning was they're committing the crimes, and actually, if you look at the proportion we're in prison per crime committed, it's not too many, it's too few, meaning it's under the population. And to which I should have an answer if I'm a good advocate of my position. And I would have had an answer, and I'm not going to rehearse the answer, but I mean, basically it's that if these were white people who were suffering under the same depredations of the prison regime, there would be a different attitude about it. This is a reflection of a devaluation of Black life that you allow for balancing the cultural budget of the country on the backs of the people who are the least advantaged. Words to that effect. And a student could likewise be challenged to come up with arguments. And there's something about the authoritative relationship between the professor and the student that I think obliges the professor to be more empathetic and maybe cushion, but not to not challenge, but as a smackdown. Now, they're not too many, they're too few. I dare you to say anything about it kind of thing. That's an abusive reaction,
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, John, my clock says an hour, more or less. Want to call it quits?
I think we have done our job for today.
We've created enough turmoil out there in the blogosphere. We'll see what happens. Thanks for joining me, John. Take care.
As always, thank you, Glenn.